The big story tonight, obviously, the presidency. Still too close to call in Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Colorado. But in terms of the Senate races and the governor's races, those are important not just as standalone results tonight, but also in terms of what they indicate for the continuing national race. I want to run down some of what we know already about governors with you. In the state of North Carolina, Bev Perdue is the Democratic governor in North Carolina. She decided not to run for re-election, and this flips with Pat McCrory. NBC News projecting Pat McCrory, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in North Carolina, as the winner in North Carolina. That means this governorship flips to the Republican Party. In Vermont, the incumbent Democratic governor, Peter Shumlin, is projected by NBC News to hold on to his seat there. In New Hampshire, NBC News projects that the winner is the Democratic candidate, Maggie Hassan. That's a Democratic hold. John Lynch had been the previous Democratic governor of New Hampshire. In Delaware, NBC News projects that the incumbent Democratic governor of Delaware, Jack Markell, is holding on to his seat. In North Dakota, the incumbent Republican governor of North Dakota is projected by NBC News to also hold on to his seat. Now, in Indiana, where Governor Mitch Daniels is outgoing, right now it is too early to call between Republican Mike Pence and the Democrat John Gregg. Again, Indiana, too early to call in that governor's race. In West Virginia, we are also looking at a race that is too early to call. The incumbent Democrat in West Virginia is Earl Ray Tomblin. Too early to call between him and his Republican challenger. Also too early to call in Missouri. The incumbent Democrat Jay Nixon, too early to call against his Republican challenger. We have a state call for you in the presidential race. In the state of Wisconsin, NBC News is projecting President Obama as the winner in the state of Wisconsin. Tamron Hall has the latest from our exit polling. Tamron?
Well, Rachel, you hear the crowd. You just called Wisconsin, and this crowd around me, I cannot ignore what we are hearing. It's interesting that you're telling us about Wisconsin now, because this next set of information might give us some insight. So what were voters feeling today about issues of class and inequality in America? Our NBC News exit poll finds voters do think economic unfairness is a big deal. 54% say the American economic system favors the rich, while 40% believes it is fair to most Americans. Now take a look as we dig deeper. We also asked voters whether the presidential candidate's policies would favor the rich, middle class, or the poor. But when you look at Romney's numbers, 52% believe his policies would favor the rich. 35% say they would favor the middle class. Just 2% think his policies would favor the poor. In comparison to the numbers we're seeing for Obama, 31% believe his policies would favor the poor, while 43% say his policies would favor the middle class. Only 10%, the number there, believe the policies from President Obama would favor wealthy Americans. So we'll keep an eye on this number. It's interesting. Wisconsin, I lived in Illinois. You're talking a lot of working class folks, perhaps class fairness, inequality were on their minds, and we might see that trend in other states that we're waiting to hear news out of. Rachel.
Tamron, thank you very much. Again, the big news that we just announced here, the Wisconsin polls closed at 9 p.m. Now at 9:30 p.m., NBC News is projecting that President Obama has won the state of Wisconsin. This is a state that Republicans actually felt like they might have a real shot in part because of the unsuccessful effort by Democrats and by labor groups in particular to recall Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin after his effort to strip union rights in the state. The backlash against him stripping union rights in the state was successful. They did actually get that policy overturned, but they were not able to recall Scott Walker. And the Republicans had made a big deal out of the fact that that big Democratic try fell short. They thought that that indicated that they were going to have a great ground game in Wisconsin, and they might be able to outperform their 08.
This is the huge difference in a presidential election. Everybody tries to. We're seeing this wonderful outpouring of effort to stand in line for 7 or 8 hours. They probably wouldn't do that for a governor's race. This tremendous, they made it that special case. This is Massachusetts. We're waiting to see who wins that, I assume, very close race between Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown there. Totally different electorate than that picked him back in January last year. A lot more people voting for President of the United States. We have a personal relationship with our president. Everybody watching right now has a personal feeling about Barack Obama, one way or the other. You don't have a big personal feeling about the governor of your state, and probably not to the senators from your state, probably your mayor if you live in a big city. But generally, it's the president that has the emotional contact with you. And you like him, don't like him, feel he blew it, feel he did something right. You're really connected to him. You want to vote on that election. And so it's just really democratic, lowercase d, when we have a presidential election. And all these other special elections and off-year elections just don't have that magic.
Well, Walker ran against the recall. He had people convinced that the recall was not the right thing to do. 19% of the people that came out of that election said that they were going to support President Obama, that voted for Scott Walker. And so it was a very interesting dynamic. You pointed out correctly that obviously the Democrats overtook the Senate in those recall elections. They won more recalls than the Republicans did. But Walker, brilliantly, to his credit, he dodged the bullet, saying, I'm going to run against the recall. I'm not going to run on going after the workers. I'm going to run against the recall, and he won it.
I have a call to make. I'm sorry, Lawrence. I'll go right to you. We have a call to make in a very important and hotly contested Senate race in the state of Ohio. NBC projects that Sherrod Brown has won re-election. He is the incumbent Democratic senator in Ohio. Obviously, the Ohio Senate race right now is still, the Ohio presidential race is still too close to call. But that Senate race in Ohio, more outside spending against Sherrod Brown than I think anybody else faced in the country. He has held on to his seat tonight. Lawrence O'Donnell.
Not surprising in Sherrod Brown's case, since he knows his electorate and stays close to them. Small point, the Republicans have lost both of the home states of their candidates on the presidential ticket.
You mean Paul
Massachusetts and Wisconsin.
Wisconsin and Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Romney has a home there. It's one of his home states. He may lose that. He's lost Michigan, his other home state. It's something you don't see very often. That
he'll probably lose California too. His other home.
He has a home there too. That's right.
Well, outside of Ohio, right now the Democrats own the Rust Belt. All this talk about jobs, all this talk about a bad economy.
And the alternate route, which was going to be, I believe, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, has been cut off. There's a big detour sign there. Go back to the original plan. You better win in Ohio.
In terms of Wisconsin, some of the best and most incisive reporting on Wisconsin through the whole uprising there around the union stripping law and also the recall effort against Scott Walker was done by John Nichols from The Nation. John Nichols, intimately familiar with politics in Wisconsin, which has now been called for President Obama, and also with the politics in Ohio, where he is tonight. John, you're in Toledo right now. Tell us about the view of that Wisconsin win from Ohio as we still await a projection of the race there.
Well, a cheer went up when they heard that Obama was looked to be winning Wisconsin, because Wisconsin and Ohio have a real connection. These were the two states where Republican governors moved to try and take away collective bargaining rights in a very aggressive way. And something amazing happened in 2011. Labor organized. It came back and fought hard to be ready for the big fights. And they didn't win every place. Labor won the Wisconsin Senate. They won the Ohio veto override bill. But what they did was they put people into position all over these states, and those people never went home. They never stopped campaigning. And so it's very interesting that tonight we see Sherrod Brown winning in Ohio. We see Tammy Baldwin doing very, very well in the Wisconsin Senate race. These are two people who went to the mat back in 2011 to stand with labor, and labor has stuck with them. I think something real happened, and it is affecting what's going on now in 2012.
John Nichols, thank you for that, and that's a good point about that Wisconsin Senate race. Again, recapping our projection in the Wisconsin Senate race right now. The Wisconsin Senate race is too early to call, but NBC News is saying that Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic candidate there, is in the lead in that Senate race. But again, the Wisconsin race at the presidential level has been called for President Obama. I want to bring in Howard Fineman now to talk about the Paul Ryan effect on his home state of Wisconsin and whether Republicans had a chance there with or without him. Howard?
Well, that's a short story. The Paul Ryan effect wasn't. And talking to one of the key conservatives in Washington tonight just a few minutes ago, Rachel, he said that Paul Ryan, Representative Paul Ryan, was more beloved inside the Beltway. He was more of a phenomenon inside the Beltway than he was nationally. And he questioned whether it was the right choice. The Monday morning quarterbacking has begun. And I would also point out that people who thought Paul Ryan was a good pick thought that as a self-described deer hunter Catholic, that's how he described himself, that Paul Ryan would help in the Rust Belt culturally. It would help in Pennsylvania, would help in Ohio, would help in Michigan, would help in Wisconsin, and that whole belt that has in which the so-called Reagan Democrats were often susceptible to an appeal on cultural issues. Well, this year it's clear that the cultural issues don't mean as much. This is all about the economy. This is all about jobs. The union voice was stronger with those voters, it seems, was stronger. The sort of ancestral pull of the labor unions with those people was much stronger than the cultural appeal that Paul Ryan was trying to make. So the conservatives I talked to, in the end, were not all that pleased. And as I say, the Monday morning quarterbacking has already begun.
Howard Fineman, thank you for that. Just to recap in terms of what remains outstanding in the races that are too close to call specifically: Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Colorado. Both Michigan and Wisconsin, as well as Pennsylvania, have been called for President Obama at this point. This is MSNBC's coverage of the 2012 election. Lots more to come, needless to say. We'll be right back.